Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. My name is Oak Mountain, and I'm your host. Today, I'm speaking with Zerin Beattie. Zerin has been practicing meditation for the last 20 plus years, studying techniques in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Cambodia, Thailand, Peru, and South Korea. Zerin founded Xpand in 2014 to empower people with life-changing resources to bridge the gap between body, heart, and mind in this modern world. Through years of cultivation, refinement, and practice, he has discovered methods and philosophies that genuinely help people ground their emotions, respond better, and move with more purpose throughout their lives. Forever a student, Zerin continues to seek new ways to practice mindfulness and share his findings with the world. And share them he did. Our conversation is both mindful and meaningful, and I believe it speaks for itself. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Oak from the editor's room here. I just wanted to add a note that in the production of this episode, there has been some unresolvable audio issues. You'll hear a little bit of some crackling on my track at the beginning of the conversation, and this actually carries out and deteriorates for the first 20 minutes or so. Now, that being said, you don't have to hear the 20 minutes of awful audio, as I have done my best to re-record my parts of the conversation, as the errors were only on my tracks. So for the listeners, hopefully it will be a seamless and undetectable addition. And for those watching on YouTube, you will see a slight change in my video on and off for the first 20 minutes, but for the rest of the conversation, all is well. Thank you again. Fantastic. Zerin, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, man. Thanks for the invite. It's been meaningful to connect with each other over the years and to watch your journey for sure.
Appreciate that. And I ask everybody at the start of the show the same question. So I'll ask you, what's the last thing that made you smile?
I mean, realistically, that question right there. Last thing that made me smile, man. I don't know, being around good people. You know, having a good time, being around good people, good discussion, good company, being in nature, it was a gathering of meaningful people, and it was recent, and it was a good time.
Fantastic, man. That's beautiful. It's been an interesting experience as I've been doing these calls that answer is quite common. Firstly, it's like the question people chuckle at, but also how often they respond by sharing some human connection that has come up for them. So I find that not all too unsurprising, but definitely revealing and meaningful. So our listeners would have heard a little bit about what you do and where you are currently from the intro. However, I'd love to have you share a little bit more about just the story of Xpand and how you came to be in the position you are currently.
Life has its way of, it almost seems like, I don't know, man. It's like it unravels itself and reveals itself along the path. And I've done my best to be patient and present and perceptive and to genuinely really listen to what's being felt. Whether it's a door that closes, or maybe a door that's opening, or it's about to open, or those subtleties and even feeling into an opportunity. And personally, I mean, this journey started at a pretty young age. It started with my parents planting seeds of meditation, or listening to Tony Robbins with my dad when we'd go to movies on the weekends, at a really, really young age. And those things were brought into playing competitive golf, and then into fitness, and then into deeper meditation, and then martial arts, and then float tanks, and plant medicine, and world travel, and all of these different things have kind of been overlapping, and almost it really does feel like the road has been kind of building itself along the entire journey. And in that, started Xpand over 10 years ago now. It started as a fitness company because that was my reputation at the time, and that was kind of a good base of the knowledge, but all knowing that it was leading into really a meditation and mindfulness company. Just feeling that it's probably going to take a little bit of time for people to be receptive to that, plus also gain a reputation of somebody who might be able to share perspective in that field. And knowing that at 22, people probably wouldn't respect a perspective of somebody talking about meditation. Maybe they haven't experienced much life. So I did my best to acquire and obtain perspective through various experiences throughout that time. But all while doing that, I was building a program called Become. I didn't know what it was going to be at the time. I was building it for 10 years, and I've been taking people through it the last almost four years now. And it was all in this thing that nobody even knew was coming into the future. And people didn't even know this thing existed till like 8 years into its development. Just really doing my best to build something meaningful and gather perspective and real like insights that have been helpful and that are able to be helpful to other people. And eventually it felt ready to share, and now kind of here we are. I mean, that's definitely a nutshell of the experience.
Absolutely. I appreciate how you're able to weave in several different avenues of, we might say, the human experience. This is golf, sports in general, martial arts, all of the pieces that necessarily have their roots in mindfulness, at least their roots of success in present moment awareness. And I'd love to have our listeners maybe become more aware of the nature of this program of Become. But before I do that, I actually want to pitch something to you. In a recent client call, I was speaking about meditation, and I have a mindfulness program as well, and I facilitate mindfulness and meditation. So something came to me while I was working with this client, and I thought you might appreciate it and we might be able to speak on it. Speaking on mindfulness, it's kind of a generic term, right? It can often be misconstrued because of its literal form, mindful, right? When our mind is full, well, what's my mind full of? It's full of thought, right? It's not necessarily full of present moment awareness. And so I landed on the following sentence, which, again, I'd love to hear what arises for you. The mechanism of mindfulness is the willful redirection of focus to the present moment. I'll say it again. The mechanism of mindfulness is the willful redirection of focus to the present moment.
That's pretty interesting. It feels like that's probably a pretty important part of it. The whole part, this is where it's hard to really articulate something like the experience of being mindful, right? Because there's so many dimensions and so many layers and so many connotations and all of the things. And what you're saying, it feels like it's like a puzzle piece to what it might be. Because I've recently heard it's ultimately like, I mean, there's so many aspects to what mindfulness is, right? It's like observing from a non-judgmental place, right? Like watching your life unfold while it is unfolding without putting in an interpretation onto it or whatever, right? So there's now this layer of like becoming aware of awareness itself. And whether we are redirecting our attention to something or not, we are, in my humble opinion and perspective, I'm pretty sure we are always in meditation. But to what degree is like based on what you're saying. So it's based on how present, perceptive, receptive, and mindful we are. But we're always in meditation. There's an element of us that is mindful of some form of sensation and input, and environmental awareness and all of these different things. Now, the better that we can soften into that, kind of blossom into the perspective of becoming aware of the awareness that we hold, then that's an element of mindfulness. Is that what you're saying? It's very possible. Is there, so let's say what you're saying is a good definition. Well, maybe there's just flavors to what you're saying, like the ability to become mindful. Is it in a way of being very distinct and focused, or is it in a way of softening our our the way that we are perceiving, right? So there's like three forms of meditation ultimately, right? There's basically like open awareness, there's pure perceiving, and then there's like focused meditation. And which is ultimately probably what you're describing, just into the different dials in which we can do that, which we can tune our ability to perceive and however we are being aware, right? So that's a feeling with what you said.
Now, in the previous conversation, the necessity of present awareness, be it of single point focus or this sort of soft expansion, has proven to be maybe not universal, but there's definitely a very common quality that has woven its way through our explorations of meaning. And this is the core theme of season one, meaning. And so, most recently, and I know you've been bringing this program and its techniques into correctional centers in the United States. And I'm curious as to what you see to be the nexus or what you've come to witness as it relates to meaning, story development, or personal life trajectory for the individuals that you're supporting and its connection to present moment awareness.
Bro, I mean, it has been a profound experience being there. Now, I have to be pretty careful as to what is shared and not shared, based on hoops to jump through and regulations and all of these different things. So certain details just have to be left out. But what I'm able to provide would be, man, some insights that have been coming through this experience are like, one, how simple it may really be to provide a place of support and growth for somebody, no matter who we are. And there's have been multiple moments where literally just being there and listening and caring and maybe responding a little bit here or there, but ultimately just being present and listening, dude, has like produced and alleviated so much internal turmoil for people in their experience in the center. And to the point where there was a guy that I was just doing nothing but listening, bro. And he like shook. It was like, whew, thank you so much. Like, we don't get to share anything like this in here. And he's like, I feel so much lighter right now. And I didn't do anything, bro, but care and be present. And it may really be that simple. And something that's really been noticed too is, so one of the main determining factors for growth might actually be a willingness to grow like your life depends on it. Because I've worked with there was a time where I was training the police cadet force in martial arts, and a few instructors came in, and we were instructed to really just beat the shit out of these guys, and to like treat it as an opportunity if they came across somebody on the streets that can actually fight, to show them what that could actually be like. And their level of intensity of listening and attuning and really being willing to grow and learn was so different than somebody that like kind of wants to learn how to throw a punch or something because their life depended on it. And I brought this insight into the center with the residents, and I shared this concept with them, and they were like, well, our life does depend on it. And that right there, dude, they've been so receptive and so open and so curious and so willing to ask questions and do the prompts and go through the practices because they genuinely want to be better people. And if that's not there, man, like I don't know who you are or if it even matters who you are or what you've been through. That's probably going to be a pretty significant limiting factor. Now, what's profound is that the universe and divine also has ways of doing whatever the universe and divine does. So, is that required? Probably not, because there's things that are so far out of our hands based on who knows what. But is it probably a pretty helpful element? It seems to be that way.
It seems as though, from what you're saying, that as soon as something is recognized as necessary, then secondarily it becomes a greatest priority. And so when we're looking at individuals who I might imagine have a tumultuous relationship with meaning or meaning making for their own lives or what it means to be a part of society and relationships, then the circumstances they find themselves in have literally necessitated that kind of potency. It's like when you have no other options, you make the choice that's available to you. And what I find so warming, particularly when I think about your work and the work that you're doing, and when I engage with content or when you and I have conversations like this, is that, well, let me say this. It may not be clear for listeners at home, but I had an uncle who was incarcerated for 17 years. And at the end of his sentence, not even at the end of his sentence, he was released based on wrongful conviction. So he was freed. And so correctional centers, the idea of imprisonment and the idea of isolation from society, it when I say isolation from society, it's this network that divides us from the reflection of who we are and who we could be. And that's what I mean by society. It's the relationships and all of these interconnected pieces that show us who we are. And so when we're pulled from that network, I can only imagine how much more deprivation is present in regards to that field of meaning making and self-development. That is to say, how do I know that I can become something whole or something better or something present, loving, skillful, worthy in this particular context when I'm surrounded by people who look at me like I am anything but?
Mm-hmm. Dude, 100%. And it's so fascinating because, I mean, as you were sharing, two really noticeable ingredients that have been perceived in this experience are genuine curiosity and genuine gratefulness for the opportunity are two of the main things that these guys feel and express. Because, like, when they ask a question, I mean, they are asking a question because they're really, really curious about what that could turn into for an insight, what it could mean for them, what they are able to do with it and share it with other residents or their family members. It's like there's like a sincere curiosity that goes in their personal journey and whatever they're moving through, but also developing that para el bien de todos type of approach into really like how do we share this with each other to not only improve our lives but with the lives of the people around us. There's like 14 dudes in this facility, man, that are like perceiving and like moving in that way, and the ripples that are coming from that are wild, whether it's in their life or their family members' lives or whichever, or even in the facility. And in that is an immense amount of gratitude, and they share that, and also an immense amount of gratitude for the experience because some of these residents have been in there for 20 plus years. And this is the first mindfulness program that they've experienced. So, or it's like sometimes the first time they're even digging into this kind of stuff. And they've done other um, protocols and programs and things while they've been in the center that have been helpful to move through certain things that are specifically tailored for their experience. But it's just different, bro. It's a different flavor of beingness, you know? And so there's 7 phases through it. I'll just tap into this really quick. And we just finished through the purpose phase. And part of it is like, how do we turn who we are and what we've been through into like real medicine and perspective? And these guys are able to do that in a way that is really, really, really unique. And they're feeling that, and they're grasping that, and they're sharing it with each other, and they're feeling potentially really profound benefit through who they are, where they are, and the questions that they're really wondering, man. It's wild.
For the listeners who might have caught a bit of that, Spanish, para el bien de todo means for the good of all, for some clarity. So this sort of orientation to the well-being of the collective. When I heard you speak of curiosity and gratitude, one word jumped out to me that you didn't speak, but it arose quite strongly, which is humility. And that curiosity is predicated on humility, and it's predicated on our recognition, on the recognition of our own ignorance. That is to say, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what the best thing is necessarily, or what the right path would be. And perhaps this person sitting in front of me who's willing to listen and offer this framework for me to explore and transform does. And I think that there's a powerful relationship between humility and purpose, particularly, but also the generation of meaning, or the communion with authentic meaning when it comes to the definition of one's life. And what I mean by this is that, at least insofar as I've understood and imagine the lives of these individuals based on what you're sharing, is that because of their confined circumstances, because of the limited number of options available to them, this openness to, it's almost like their hand is forced in some way. And I don't know if that's necessarily true for everybody, or for better or for worse, but when you don't have any other options, curiosity becomes quite compelling. And the reason I want to introduce humility and tie it into meaning is that if we are looking to move forward in life, and I say this for the listeners as well, who might be on a path of self-discovery, if we're looking to move forward into a life of purpose and of meaning, we necessarily have to approach the steps to get there with humility. Because if I've learned anything, brother, is that when I think I know the way, I'm wrong. So wrong. Just like you mentioned earlier, how the divine or the universe has this capacity to move and influence circumstances and variables beyond our conception. So too are the possibilities and probabilities for your future outcomes far beyond what you might conceive. And so if you're finding yourself at the nexus of what is it that I could be, or how is it that my life might become more meaningful, those questions are powerful because they rest on humility, because they rest on curiosity and a receptivity to learning and transformation.
That's such a powerful concept, dude. And it goes like, that's a fundamental element that should just be present, period. And probably more so present in particular circumstances. For example, this is bringing up a cool thing that I haven't really shared with anybody, but when I went into the facility and started to do these, I did like a handful of workshops on meditation and mindfulness before developing the group to go through the program. We're sort of like build the right people and build rapport and all of these different things, right? And to see if people are even interested. And one of the first things that I mentioned to the residents was, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know what's best for you right now. I don't know. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you've been. I'm not going to come in here and tell you what to do or anything like that. This, we are all students in this process. And this has been developed, over X amount of years and is able to help with these things. But like, this is a blueprint, right? For us to learn how to guide ourselves through. And there's those types of like beginning ripples into this process, man. And these groups specifically, people come into the facility and like all the time, man, think they know what's best for these residents and these people. And people can sniff that shit out, bro. And people can feel when like you actually don't comprehend, or when you think you do. It's a different energy. It's a different way of moving through things. And oftentimes people don't appreciate that, no matter who you are. So that, approaching things in that way, it feels better. It just feels smoother. It feels like it's more grounded in presence and learning and just being genuine, while also doing our best to provide something meaningful. I mean, it's a particular balance of things.
Absolutely. The prescriptive pretense that you're speaking to has the capacity to deny the authentic expression of the individuals involved. And I see this in terms of client work and facilitation, that if anyone comes with a preconceived notion of what they're capable of, or what it is they're going to receive, or what it is somebody else is thinking, feeling, believing, or ought to believe, all of that puts these bars of constraint on what is genuine, what is truthful, and what can, if given the space, come forward. And I think that we might find that same mirroring in the life circumstances of the people who find themselves most shut down. It's like, oh, well, you're this, therefore you can only become that. You've been through this, therefore your only outcomes are that. And it's almost, not to be hyperbolic, but it is a denial of the depth and potency of the human spirit to put such constraints upon it. And so, yeah, I wonder what arises for you in regards to that present moment expression and authenticity.
A very particular concept that has been brought to my attention recently. Have you ever heard of grounded theory?
No, sir.
Bro, me either. Until like this week. And it's blown me away, bro. So I was talking with a good buddy. He's going through like a doctorate program. And he was asking me questions about the program. And, I was sharing how I tend to go about it. And like, I don't really come prepared, more so like engage and be present and listen and ask questions, and like the right responses and diagrams and things like blossom in that moment. And he's like, dude, it sounds like you do your best to meet people where they are and to let the data reveal itself in the present moment. And he's like, this is known as grounded theory. This is an actual thing, bro. I did not know this. I just felt like this was like a natural, innate way of like being and moving through moments, right? That's developed through martial arts and plant medicine and all of the different things. And he's like, grounded theory it became a thing in the 60s, where these guys started to realize it's like, oh, maybe we actually don't know anything about this topic. So why are we trying to come into it with a hypothesis, with some preconceived notion, and try and fit this thing that we don't know into this small box, right? That to me doesn't resonate. And so these guys were wondering this. So grounded theory is ultimately fully immersing yourself into the experience and letting the data reveal itself to you. And then I'm fucking start thinking, bro, it's like, oh my gosh, like that's literally meditation, to fully immerse ourselves into a moment and let the insights and the responses reveal themselves to you. Then I'm like, holy shit. What is the opposite of that? The opposite of that is ultimately some of the biggest struggles in our lives and in society. It's interpreting something too soon. It's judging something too soon. It's labeling a thought the second it comes up. It's labeling somebody else the second they do something. And like literally, most of our problems in the world are literally the opposite of being this way, which it's been connecting so many really helpful dots in that sense.
What arises when I'm hearing you here is the contrast between two ideas, one being the revelation of meaning and the other being the manufacturing of meaning. And this is so fun to hear you speak of grounded theory, because in my facilitations and the work that I've been doing, it's like that's what works. It just seems to be the method, the technique, the approach that allows for the greatest expansion, not only in myself, but also in those that I'm serving, to actually come into connection and communion with what is calling for attention and presence. And when we recognize that there actually is a genuine phenomenon known as revelation, and I don't just mean in a biblical or religious sense, but the universe, our bodies, our minds, our subconscious, however you want to label it, has the ability to reveal to us meaning. And I think that the difference, the really important difference I might want to place a pin on right at the center here, is that in the revelation of meaning, we're not required or falling back on, we're not requiring any other notion other than what arises. And this is what you're speaking to, is that all of what is brought to the present moment, just as we were speaking to the prescriptive propensity that some people might have in entering into and speaking with the residents that you work with, anything that we bring to the present moment has the ability to constrain the truth that arises. And it is absolutely the same mechanism of meditation, because meditation is this here-ness, now-ness, yes-ness. And I think all of those pieces, when brought into a therapeutic setting or a peak experience setting, a transformational workshop, even if they're brought into your own moments day to day. And I say that for the listeners, this openness, this receptivity, and this yesness have the ability to grant a navigational power to your attention that can actually direct you to greater depths of meaning. You don't have to rely on the cultural imprints. You don't have to rely on the traumatic narratives that are woven into your body, into your mind, that there's actually this potency immediately and I might say in just incessantly available to you, should you choose to welcome that in with a willingness to listen. So I really love that you shared that. Thank you.
I've been sharing it with as many people as I can this week, and this is the perfect platform for it. Dude, you're 100% on point with that. And it's ultimately building, it's tuning our way of being, it's tuning our way of perceiving and receiving, period. ... And how do we do that? Probably through meditation and mindfulness. Ultimately, it's becoming aware of, when do we feel stuck? When do we not feel stuck? When do we feel constricted or restricted around certain people or in certain environments? When do we feel like we're able to be open and flourish and genuinely be who we are? It's like, that's what's so interesting about the concept of mindfulness and the connotation of having a full mind, like you previously mentioned, is like, yes, and it's tricky because, Eckhart Tolle and all these people, it's like, this is a common question of like people not feeling the best about the word mindful because of exactly what you're saying. But what's profound about it is, it's like, maybe it's just the wrong way of looking at it, because a mindfulness is probably perceiving between the space in which you perceive. a fullness of presence. So it's not the thought that you're becoming mindful of, it's the connective tissue between the connected thoughts. So it's this spaciousness in between the things that broaden things out, and that can kind of push something broader, like a mapacho in a sense. And you're like broadening room and allowing more heartfelt presence to be felt. And it's kind of perceiving between the lines in a way, which can feel like profoundly full presence. And what's tricky is like, so like an isolation tank, a float tank, is an amazing tool at helping people feel this spaciousness. Because how do we know? We don't have any freaking idea, bro, on what that might feel like or what that pocket can be unless we feel the potential of what that can mean. And a float tank is an amazing tool to help people loosen their unconscious grip of external stimulus, bring that awareness back into their being, the observer, the perceiver, and feel more of who they would genuinely be. And that is profoundly helpful.
Beautifully said, brother. I think that's a great time to take a pause, and we'll be right back for the second half of the show. As the first half of our show sets in, I wanted to thank you for listening to the Smiling Human podcast. This show would not be possible without the support of listeners like you. Liking and following on YouTube, sharing with a friend, or following on your local podcast app are all easy and simple ways that you can support this show and help it grow into the future. If you do want to support this show directly, you can consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Patrons get perks like early access to all episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and access to live Q&As with me. If this feels within your means, then please consider becoming a patron. Now let's get back to the show. Excellent. Well, as we are in the second half of our show now, I like to start it off with the section I'm calling the question of the week, which is where I invite guests to bring an inquiry or a question that's meaningful to them to share with the audience, with myself, or just for the general purposes of discussion. So, Zerin, what have you got for us?
I appreciate this. And literally, quote unquote, couldn't even think of a question until one came through 15 minutes before this podcast. And part of it was like, anything that was coming up was like, that's just a thought. It's like, is that actually what I'm wondering? Yeah, I could ask that, but like, what's the reason behind having that be the thing that's mentioned? It's like, I mean, you can say a question, but is that only coming up because that's what you think you should say, or because that's what you think somebody would want you to say? Just like those, just like being aware of what was even coming up, right? Hashtag mindfulness. But what that kind of brought through was really feeling into the type of discussion that we may have and share here. And all things considered, bro, like working with residents at the correctional center, being a person, being somebody who provides a mindfulness program, and sharing deep moments with people, whether sharing fucking the depth, bro. Like, whether it's suicidal ideation, wondering how to move through things, wondering how to find their purpose or meaning, or doctors who are like doing their best to develop a better ability to embody themselves and to support who they support better. You know, there's so many different like nuances and versions of people that I would be super fortunate enough to be around and to work with and to learn from and to hear from. And for people to share, man, like deep things with me. Genuinely so grateful. But that being the soil, it's like How do we do this thing, bro? Like, how do we do what we are hoping to do? How do we do this thing that we share called life? Like, if we're all in so many different nuances and spectrums, and there's so many like very common variables that we all share, but there's a degree and a scale within each one of these common variables that can completely change someone's soul experience or their relation to who they are or their relation to the present moment or whatever they would be doing or going through. And part of those wondering notions are like part of how the Become program was built the way it's built. A lot of it's designed around asking questions, like not telling somebody what they're going through or telling somebody what they're going to experience, or, oh, if you're experiencing this, well, that means this. It's like there's concepts, and it's like, well, have you considered this? Well, what about this thing over here? Huh, okay, if we're feeling these things, well, what could be the deeper roots of where those are coming from? Like, really helpful questions to help each other discover more of the meaningful map that we would be moving through. And if we all hold perspective, and if we all hold medicine, that's probably pretty unique based on who we are, our upbringing, our background, all of these different elements, then having somebody fucking tell you what that is probably isn't the most helpful thing. But having somebody support you in discovering what that may be for you is probably a pretty meaningful human experience. And that's been felt for me, having people try and tell me what I'm going through or what the fuck I'm experiencing means. And it's like you know inherently there's some disconnect there, right? So knowing what it feels like to not be approached this way, and then doing your best to approach people in maybe the way that we haven't felt before, to produce that, to provide that, to share those ripples, all of the things, right? So fundamentally, the concept and the wonder of like, how do we do this thing? And maybe that means, how do we do this of what we're even experiencing right now? How do we produce meaningful things that we can provide a living from while also being in alignment with divine, with our soul, with our heart, with a moral compass, right? How do we move through deep emotions that maybe people are feeling pretty freaking stuck in, dude? And so just this deep root of how do we move through where we would be well and efficient, not even efficiently, how do we move through this thing well and meaningfully, hopefully minimizing damage and producing something that has room for beautiful dimensional growth. And that's different, bro, for everybody, no matter where they are or what moment they're going through. But those fundamental questions can inherently be very helpful. Because the question can be a planted seed, dude, in so many ways.
I'm coming to realize that the caliber of people that I seek to speak to tend to bring a caliber of question into this arena that always, I would say, demands the respective contemplation. And in response to the question, how do we do this thing called life, and how do we do it well or meaningfully? I think taking into consideration what you have established here, that the prescriptive notions of how it ought to be done, what the outcomes ought to be, what meaningful means for you, that all of those are the antithesis of our actual trajectory, so to say. And so, with that in mind, here's what I would offer in response to that. Life is to be lived, and to live is to be and to do. We have a genuine sense that there is a way to live well and that a meaningful and purposeful life is possible. As such, how you do what you do and what you do will determine whether or not you are living in alignment or moving towards your realm of well-being and meaning. And so, how is it that we do this? I think recognizing that there are things that ought to be done, doing is necessary, just as much as tuning into being is necessary, and that the quality of your doings can be informed by the nature of your aim. And so I think if anyone is toying with these questions of how do I live a meaningful life and how do I engage with those in my life in a meaningful way that promotes well-being, it behooves you to really get in touch, perhaps through this revelatory process, as to what wellness really means, what a fulfilling life really means for you, and allow those answers to come from within. And when they resonate, when they awaken and enliven your being, enliven your mind, and enliven your heart, you can set those up as an aim and hold to them as an aim. There's a deep wisdom in each mind and each heart and each soul that I think is just waiting to be asked the question, how ought I live? How might I respond lovingly? What can I do now? I think that's the piece. Know that it ought to be done, that you will not succeed unless you know where you're going, and that you can trust in your innate wisdom to illuminate for you the ways that you are living that are either bringing you closer to or farther from that aim.
Super interesting addition. Another addition on top of that, when we consider the concept of aim, is the quality of our aim and the quality of our direction is probably going to be rooted in the quality of our questions. And if we're asking questions like, oh, why are you such a moron? Why does this always happen to you? It's producing the quality of said aim. When it's the quality of the question may be rooted in, okay, what should you be learning from this moment right here? Like, what's this trying to show you? How can this be molded into something really beautiful? How is this able to be fertilizer? Would this be showing me a part of this map that I'm not familiar with? When we ask better questions, something happens, dude. It's so far beyond me or you. And that's part of our participation, it feels like. And then to become mindful of what questions we are even asking. And what are we listening to, right? And maybe like somebody, this was popping up too, would like to live a fulfilled life, right? Well, then it's like, well, what does that even feel like? That's a valid question. Like, that's a valid question. What does being or feeling fulfilled even feel like? And maybe we don't get those answers immediately. But if we begin to even unpack that, okay, what does it feel like? What might it look like? Okay, what are some things that do feel fulfilling? What are some things that don't feel fulfilling? We can get a gauge on whatever we are hoping to feel or embody or bridge or bring. And provide an experience and become for ourselves and for the environments and for so much more. Um, One other meaningful thing here is like I was talking with a good buddy. He's a behavioral psychologist at a pretty big local hospital. And he was talking about the aspect that that nurture becomes nature based on the way that the parent parents their child. So the way they parent actually changes the brain of the child. Then he's like, the thing is, we are all children. We are all experiencing these influences from our environments. So when we consider, like, what do things feel like when they resonate? What do they not? What does it feel like when they're not resonating? All of these different things are helping us drop deeper into the place that we wish to be and bring and embody for the benefit of ourselves and the of the people around us, without a doubt.
The role and power of inquiry underlies the intention of this show. And so it's hitting very close to home. And I think that what you're driving at might be distilled into an idea that if there is this deeper yearning inside that many of us have and live with for greater meaning and greater fulfillment, that we can clarify the path, clarify our next steps by asking questions, and particularly asking well-defined questions, questions that will narrow the scope of focus such that we can hone in on these little nuggets of gold that we seek. And so I'm curious if you are capable and willing, if you could share with the listeners maybe just a few things they might do for themselves today to, if they're feeling out of alignment, bring themselves back and, yeah, come in more into connection with this trajectory towards meaning and purpose.
So, without knowing the details of anybody, right, and the nuances of where this could go, what's being felt would be fundamentally slowing down, just becoming a little bit more in touch with the subtleties of where you would or wouldn't be, but probably more so in this moment where you would be. Beginning to wonder, ponder, contemplate, plant seeds, and ask some meaningful questions, whether it's for your personal journey or for the journey of the people around you. Like some people, we all have families, right? Maybe our family members are going through some stuff. Well, maybe even wondering, okay, what could this be helping show your loved one? What's a deeper lesson in this? Just slowly opening the subtle jar of like wondering deeper questions, inward and outward. From there, beginning to attune our compass, bro, for real, with like who we genuinely wish to become. Like for real. Like who we genuinely wish to become. And what it feels like a helpful way to know what that may be or to feel deeper into that is also rooted in asking questions. Okay? How do we wish to feel? What are we able to provide the world? What have we been through that we don't wish to continue producing in the world? What are some things that have guided us to be who we are and where we are? Are those things helpful? Are they harmful? Or have they been helpful up until this point, but maybe there's a better route from here? Beginning to really feel into this stuff. And then ultimately doing our best to embody and become that being in as many moments as we possibly can. The way that we breathe, the way that we feel, the way that we respond. Like, for example, like the Become program isn't about becoming something into the future. It's part of it, a huge root of it, is attuning our compass to what that may be and feel like, and doing our best to become and bridge that into the moments that we are in. But it's helpful to hold a compass and an orientation for something, hopefully for the good of all, para el bien de todos, right? And then like doing our best to, like you were saying, feel into when would we be or feel in alignment to this? When would we not feel in alignment? And holding grace and compassion when maybe we wouldn't be in alignment. And maybe when we fall, and this is where grace and compassion are enormous, and empathy, it's like maybe when we fall, quote unquote, out of alignment, that's also just alignment, because then we comprehend and we're mindful now of what it feels like to be out of alignment with who we wish to be. It's like if we're able to perceive in a particular way, then each moment's able to be medicinal and helpful, whether it's for ourselves or for another person or whichever. And probably one of the deeper roots to how come become has been so unbelievably helpful for so many people in different ways is because of the shared common elements. It's like we don't have to know what somebody is particularly going through to comprehend what it's like to move through deep emotions. We're sharing the element of moving through deep emotions, or wondering, or not knowing, or like wondering what the fuck's going on, or like being swept up in something. That's relatable. That's shareable. And if we can comprehend that, and we can distill these particular experiences and moments into something medicinal that we as beings share, bro, what a meaningful way to be and respond and perceive and behave. And no doubt we're all human, bro, and we probably won't do that all the time. But if we can hold that compass and move in that direction, hopefully we will be able to behave that way more often than not. Not that we don't feel emotions, or maybe we lose our cool or whatever. I mean, fuck, that's part of the what's the groove, what's not the groove. Like for real. And grace and compassion. There's one more thing being felt here. I have a whiteboard right here. I would love to draw something, but it might take a second.
Go for it.
All right. I don't know. This is me totally guessing on how this is going to look and work.
And this is a little gift for our YouTube viewers. If you're listening on one of our audio-only platforms, I'd encourage you to go check out the Smiling Human channel on YouTube to see what our brother Zerin here is about to draw for us on his whiteboard.
Dude, whiteboards are one of the world's greatest inventions. Okay. So that's probably a messed up Sharpie for Expo. So bear with me, my friends, because I'm going to do this as quick as I possibly can. This comes up so much over the years. And whenever this is shared, it's like a massive light bulb for people. So
once he's complete, I'll describe it for our audio-only listeners.
Cool. I mean, I'll go deep into it.
Amazing.
Also. All right, cool. This is, I could do more, but that's fine for now. So, okay. This right here is representing our compass and our orientation. So when we hold a compass and an orientation, then everything we go through actually becomes fuel that supports that compass and that orientation, whether that's our intention, whether that's our purpose, or whatever it may be. I'll get to an example in a second. When we don't have a compass or orientation, then everything we go through becomes our purpose. So when somebody cuts you off in traffic, well, then you're funneled into oh, this piece of shit, they did this to me, they whatever. That's becoming your purpose. Rather than if you hold a purpose of doing your best to embody more compassion or be a decent freaking human, well, then that experience is now an opportunity for you to embody and bridge that into the world. This right here might be one of the most helpful fundamental discoveries that have come through in working with people, is the importance of holding a compass, purpose, and orientation, and allowing these moments to be fuel for that to be embodied and bridged, versus when that's not present, getting lost in the weeds and ultimately having everything else around you become your main focal point instead of fuel.
So for our audio only listeners, what I was seeing from Zerin there is you can imagine a winding pathway and a large arrow overlaid on top of it. And this arrow is what represents our compass and our orientation, almost like a tethering point. And the points along this winding journey are constantly being related back to and in service of this compass and this orientation. So all of the pieces that we go through, everything that arises in our lives, is in service to the trajectory towards this orientation. That was one of the diagrams. And the other diagram was, again, a wandering path without this arrow, without this orientation. And every point on this path became a focal point, like Zerin was explaining, where the attention, the focus, the energy, the attempt to meaning make is all focused central to each of those experiences rather than being placed in the larger context of our chosen orientation and compass. So wonderfully done.
Dude, well explained.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So for our audience here who's curious about becoming greater versions of themselves and deepening into mindfulness, or just curious to learn and hear more from you, where can they find you?
I'm pretty active on Instagram. It's basically at Xpand yourself. Just expand yourself without the E. Website is xpandyourself.com/become for the program. Email, obviously, Zerin at expandyourself. I'm pretty easy to reach. I definitely encourage these types of discussions. I genuinely care about people and hope to be just of help and just genuinely. So whether it's a discussion or a question, I'm pretty open to continuing that with people. And of course, you can go much deeper through the process that has now been in the works for about 14 years. And it's produced some pretty remarkable transformations that blow me away all the time. So
fantastic. Well, Zerin, thank you so much for your presence, time, and contribution. It's a pleasure as always to converse with you. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Smiling Human Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing on YouTube or giving a follow on your local podcast app. I know I said it in the mid-roll, but I'll say it again. If you'd like to support this show directly, you can do so at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. You'll gain access to perks like early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes content, as well as access to live Q&As. Also, I've just produced an insight journal and I want to give it to you for free. You can find access to this month-long personal development journal in the link below. This is in the show notes or in the YouTube description. Also, if you feel inspired by the sharing that has taken place in conversations like this and you want to work with me directly, you can find a link to a free call below. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you again.